I wish my leadership journey hadn't turned 7 years ago, but maybe it had turned 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because I can't imagine the positive impact that I could have had on people, not just businesses, not just numbers, not just achievements. It could have been on people's lives. And I hope there are people's lives out there that I touched positively. But I know more than anything going forward, I don't ever have to wonder if that's the case. I know that now.
This is one of the most important podcast episodes we have ever or will ever record. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Laurie Butz. She's the CEO and president of Capital Credit Union, a growing credit union with over $2 billion in assets, more than 400 employees, and over 110,000 credit union members. I opened by saying this is one of the most important podcast episodes we will ever record. Why do I say this? It's because of the window that Laurie has given us into her life as a leader. During our discussion, she shares with raw and rare transparency her personal development journey as a leader, and that includes her talking about some attitudes and perspectives that she would be embarrassed to hold today. But that's just the point. She no longer holds those attitudes and perspectives. At the age of 50, Laurie was successful by every external measure. At work, she was a leader in the company, was making good money, had been consistently promoted throughout her career, and was producing good results. At home, she was physically healthy, had a good marriage, and a healthy daughter. She had all the things, but internally, she was unsatisfied. She didn't feel the fulfillment from her success that she thought she would. So she began to wrestle with that reality. As she did, she was introduced to a leader who is considered by many in the business community as the gold standard of leadership, a leader who has produced exceptional results over the course of multiple decades. Through her relationship with that leader, Laurie began to see the responsibilities and opportunities of leadership in an entirely new light. Today, she is profoundly more fulfilled and satisfied, and, oh by the way, continues to produce exceptional results. So much so that last year she was promoted to president and CEO from a spot in the executive suite that almost never ends up in the role of president and CEO. So join me as we get a front row seat to Laurie's leadership transformation. I encourage you to listen for the pieces of Laurie's story that sound familiar to your own story. And in the end, you might even consider walking down some of the same roads that Laurie has traveled. Make an investment in listening to this episode. You won't be sorry you did.
As I look back to my younger years, I had amazing teachers, amazing coaches that really influenced me to take leadership roles. This is really kind of silly, but I was a really tall young girl. So I think because of my stature, everyone kind of assumed I would just be the leader. And so they put me in those roles all the time. So I think that was pretty instrumental in forming why I took the lead versus just being the follower. But once I got past the teachers and the coaches, it really became college professors, very impactful. I had a tendency to want to be the teacher's pet. I would do all the extra work. I would do the errands for them. I would grade papers for them, do all kinds of fun stuff. And then that went into my work world too. Essentially, my bosses became my mentors. And again, I was kind of that teacher's pet, always trying to be the one for doing the extra credit and doing the extra work. I really felt like all of those accomplishments were going to form me, and I used things like in my mind, it was never satisfied, never enough. I was going to dream big. I was going to do great things. So I was very driven to do that. And it wasn't until I got into the later years of my career that I really started to realize how unsatisfied I was. Looking around collectively, you could say I was successful. I had a great job. I had a great marriage. I had a little girl. Things were going really, really well. I was healthy, and I was just really unsatisfied. Unfulfilled became the word later that I realized after doing deep dives into development of myself, because I was leading, but I didn't feel like I was a good leader. I was getting results. I'm going to say that. And this is where a pivotal point when I turned 50, and maybe it was you turn those certain ages and you look back and you go, oh my goodness, what did I do right and what did I not do so right? And one of the things that I realized is at the age 50, I just didn't feel accomplished when I should have, for all intents and purposes. And I compared myself to everybody all the time. And it was painful because there's always going to be someone who's smarter and wealthier and has more of whatever it is. And that's painful. So it was when I started to feel that pain that it started to manifest itself into maybe a little bit of unhappiness, if you will. And I remember my leader at the time who I was reporting to, she said something to me that made me so angry. I thought I was going to lose my mind. But she said, you're just all out for yourself. It's all about you. What made me so intensely angry, I don't even recall responding. I just went home that night and was so infuriated because I felt like I had sacrificed my life for doing all of these things and getting all these results, whether it be for the companies that I worked for, the teams I was on, just everything. I felt like I sacrificed everything. I worked 24/7. People called me a workaholic all the time. No one could ever say I wasn't a hard worker. But to say I was doing it for myself was just the worst thing someone could say to me, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing it for my bosses, my coworkers, my employees, my family. I'm not happy. And you're telling me I'm doing it for myself. If I was doing it for myself, don't you think I would be thrilled to that? So that set me on a journey. And I thank God for my husband, because I went home that night and he said, you know what, Laurie, I think I should call Bob Chapman. And Bob Chapman changed my life. My husband worked for Barry Miller Companies, and he had a relationship with Bob Chapman, the CEO. He wrote the book, Everybody Matters, and he so generously agreed to meet with me. And we started meeting, and this is over 6 years ago now, so going on 7 years. And he just started to share with me the importance of leadership for the right reasons and the importance of accomplishments for the right reasons. So I started down this path of Simon Sinek and doing the start with why and find your why. And my daughter actually did the exercise of find your why with me to try to understand what was my why. And I did assessments with my team and had them anonymously tell me what words described me as a leader. Because why, if I could be this successful leader, did I feel so not successful? And what I realized is the words that I thought had been so important all my life: driven, results-oriented, doer, go-getter, dedicated. All those words that I thought, oh, these are great words, were empty because they were missing words like loving, caring, kind, nurturing, developing. And those were the words that I wanted people to think of me and for me to think of me that way. Because one of the exercises I did with my daughter was we had to think back to when was I most happy doing whatever I was doing. And it always landed on when I was either helping to develop others, helping to teach someone something so that they can go off and do it themselves, or even when I was just being really kind and I had no expectations of getting anything out of it. I was just doing something really nice for someone or somebody or the community or something. And that's when I realized that's where the happiness is. That's where the success is, really just those relationships, and just be yourself and be the best self you can be. But then I started using an R squared methodology, and it was R squared stood for relationships and results. And no longer could I just be about results, because I was. I mean, I spent a career being about results. But what I realized is the relationships that actually, and I'll say this freely now that I've worked with people like Steve Jones, I'm free now to love the people I work with, not to get anything out of them, but to have them get everything that they want to get out of their career, their day, whatever the case might be. So it was relationships and results, and how could I balance the two, especially when every assessment in the world, ENTJs, DISCs, the predictive index use words like commander, captain, decisive. It's dominance. Oh my God, those words mortify me now. And it was the everybody matters, the be kind, to love one another. Every single person you interact with is somebody's precious child or precious mom or dad or sibling or whatever. And if I can always lead with that, put the relationship first, the results will come. And now I still measure everything and I still make sure I'm getting the job done. But I don't have to ever do it with a heavy hand. I do it with a heavy heart sometimes. I ache more for people than I used to. I pay more attention. I used to be so missile focused. I'd walk through a building of 200 people and not see anyone because I was on a mission. And so I look back and I think back to that cruel day where my boss told me I was all about myself. And I can see now why it appeared that way. And I'm really, really thrilled to death that almost 7 years later, I don't think people would say that about me anymore.
There are so many things, Laurie, in the sharing of that story that are worth us spending some time to unpack and dig in further. And I want to go back a little bit because one of the things that you are doing right now and I've done enough of these discussions that I feel pretty confident in saying you're doing something very rare, which is people in your position don't often feel comfortable to talk about the personal journey that you're talking about. They're a little more guarded. Even if they've gone on that journey, they're like, I don't know how they're going to feel about me if they hear this. And what you're saying is something happened to you not 3 decades ago, but 7 years ago, not that long ago, and that you had a significant and successful, by many standards, career leading up to the age of 50. But things have shifted for you since then. So I just want to give people a little bit of a deeper understanding of Laurie pre-50. So talk about those words that you would have championed or valued so much to be said about you. Just tell us a little bit more about how you led and how you thought as a leader previous to 7 years ago.
I would say that it was goal driven. So I have been doing for 32 years on 3x5 cards goals.
By the way, you guys can't see this on the podcast, but I'm looking at Laurie and she just reached to the side and she's holding 3x5 cards that it looks like they have a binder clip on them too. So there's more than one of these. So she's not kidding when she's talking about goals. She's got them right handy as we're having this discussion. Go ahead, Laurie.
And they're always with me. And I've had them literally. I have 32 years worth of them. And then I have certain ones. Every once in a while I do bucket list. So I'll have the bucket list and then I have the goals. And it was interesting. So not only was I goal driven, I was going to measure everything. But if it could be measured, I was going to measure it. And whether that came in from a personal standpoint, I had weight goals, workout goals, financial goals, career goals. While I like the whole goal thing, where it starts to get painful is when I think about I wanted to promotional goals, titles were important to me, things like that. And I was determined. I was going to get the golden ticket, whatever the golden ticket was going to be. And I set my sights on titles, like I said, even CEO titles. But it wasn't until I started to look at those words of determined, dedicated, driven, that someone described to me once as, you're ruthless. You're going to GSD. And I think you know what that stands for. So, they wanted me on their team. But I look back at that and I think, at what cost? What was the wake I was leaving? I can go back, and I'm probably being a little bit mean to myself. I tried really hard to develop those who worked for me too, had very, very high expectations. But at the same time, high expectations, I learned you cannot thrust your expectations on other people. You can't judge them. I judged people. People, if they didn't work crazy long hours, I judged them. This whole concept of work from home, I thank God that wasn't something when I was a younger leader, because I would have really thought that was, that's for the couch potatoes or whatever. That's where now I don't believe that's the case at all. I think there is absolutely a place for that. So as I look back, I think the issue became the words that were missing. They would describe me as a hard worker. She's dedicated. She's this. No one would have ever described me. And had they described me this way, I might not have even liked it, as nice. No, I don't think anyone would have said, oh, she's really nice. She's really caring. And it wasn't until I had this emptiness, and it's like, what is this all for? I'm going to get to my gravestone and it's going to say she worked really hard to get here. But like, that's
Laurie, I've never heard that before in my life. That is brilliant.
But that's how I felt. So it was like, I wanted people to know I cared deeply. I didn't lead that way. You wouldn't have thought I did, but I suffered deeply for people. I think the issue was I would go home and feel horrible. So, like, say for instance, Tim, if you worked for me and let's say you were missing your numbers or whatever, and I'm driving it home with you and I decide to go on a lecturette for you, lo and behold, I'm so sorry if that would be the case. And I apologize to anyone who's listening who has ever gotten one of those lectures from me. But the reality was they would be crushed. But I'm like, that's just making them stronger. And then I'd go home and I'd feel bad about it. But I never really did anything about making them feel bad. I was like, oh, well, they'll get over it. What doesn't kill them makes them stronger. Where I would not do that to a person now. I would stand in front of a bus and let it hit me before I would throw somebody under the bus. I have learned such critical elements of you can hold people accountable and you can keep them on track and moving in the right direction without all of that other garbage that goes with it. The days of command and control are over. And maybe periodically there's a need to do that kind of thing. If it's a crisis situation, obviously, if somebody's headed into a real danger zone, there might be reasons to do that. But in the normal operations of a day in a business, you just don't have to do that. So I was pained for what I did to people. I look back and I've had some pretty horrific experiences with leaders, just confidence crushing. And I guess it made me stronger. But maybe what it made me instead was realize that those leave scars.
You said it earlier, there are different ways to get to the same outcome. And one of them involves this kind of crushing lecture. And then there's the way you do it now, which is different. I want to get into that because I think it's going to be really important. When you think about the goals that were unfulfilling or unsatisfying, was there any particular one or two that you got to and you're like, this is it? That's what that feels like? Or was it more just a general like malaise the whole time and there wasn't any particular goal achievement that was unsatisfying?
No, I remember one very, very, very distinctly. Because all this time that I was moving up the ladder, if you will, I always had my sights set on the executive team. I wanted to be in that boardroom. I wanted to be one of them. I wanted to have the respect that they got. And I remember what a huge disappointment my first executive meeting was. I was a senior VP at a nameless company. I'm not going to say where. And I walked into the meeting, and I could say where because I love them all, but I just had these visions of how highly intelligent and brilliant these people were, and that their conversations were going to be deep and meaningful and strategic, and I was just be floored. And it was nothing like that. I was like, seriously? This is what I've been basically breaking my back and working all these hours for, is to work my way up to, oh, so what should we have for lunch at the strategic planning session? Seriously? And I'm being a little facetious. That wasn't probably the conversation, but that was probably one that just sticks out in my head that, wow, this isn't all that special. And I used to tell people that periodically when people would be, well, did you talk about that at the executive team or management team or leadership team, whatever the company decided to call that important behind the doors meeting that they had every other week or every week and whatever. And I said, it's really not that magical. It's much more practical than it is magical. And I think one of the things that someone said to me, I used to work in an environment where someone described those meetings as the air gets sucked out of the room. So we can all kind of envision what that would be like. But someone said to me here who had previously worked with me in other settings and then said, you know, what is it like in the management team meetings with Laurie? And the person said, there's a lot of air in the room and there's a lot of laughter too. My heart almost burst. It was just like, that is so cool.
This was a more recent comment, I take it.
Much more recent comment. Yep. So that was probably one of the biggest disappointments from a goal standpoint because I had the senior VP title. I was going places and I was at the executive table and it just wasn't that. It's just what, and the people aren't, it kind of goes back to when people say everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time or whatever. I think the hard part for me and the big realization for me was I spent my entire life, and this is really hard to recognize that I did, but I compared myself to the bigger, the better, you know what I mean?
Sure. Here's what I love about your transparency and your honesty, Laurie. You're articulating things that so many of us have thought to ourselves, but didn't want to say out loud. And right now you're saying it out loud. And that's why I'm like, oh man, this is so awesome that people are going to get to hear this, because now we're going to walk across the Bob Bridge here, because you're going to show them that no matter how much of your early story they relate to, that there's possibilities that are bigger and more meaningful and more significant. But I don't imagine that was super obvious to you immediately. But your husband, God bless him, says, I know a guy, and obviously many people at this point know who Bob Chapman is. If you've not read the book, Everybody Matters, I certainly recommend it. What was it like early on for you as you began to spend time with Bob?
You know how sometimes you don't realize the impact of something until it's going to be later. I don't think I sat down and went, oh, I'm talking to Bob Chapman, because he's so down to earth. You just don't realize that you're talking to one of the top CEOs in the world. But one of the things that he kept challenging me to do, and he just did an amazing job always asking me questions. I didn't go on long tirades of stories. I was just answering certain questions. And of course, looking back now, he was doing that to kind of dissect my thinking so that he could plant new seeds to have formative thought growth, if you will.
It's almost like he was tilling the soil for you in terms of what was going to be planted.
Exactly. So he was always very respectful of, you've been successful, but what's it going to take to get you to feel successful? And when he started, and of course I had read his book.
What did you think of it when you first read it? Because he's a very different take than many leaders, and you were coming from a very different place.
It's interesting that you say that, because I'm like, this is hokey. Yeah, sure, you can say that after you're successful, but do you really mean that? Do you really feel that way? And I had the unique advantage of seeing my husband having gone through some of the training, and it changed him. And he's a softie. My husband's a really patient, nice guy. Those words are used for him. Those words weren't ever used for me. But he went through the training, and then I knew some of the other employees there. So I knew the people who were living it and breathing it and seeing it. And I thought, wow, if you can impact manufacturing guys who swear at each other in a pretty hot environment, that's pretty amazing. And it was funny because Bob was not a user of the word love like Steve Jones is, but Bob was all about care. How do we care and care deeply for our people and show caring? That was probably the turning point for me with his conversations, and then me looking at the book without knowing him personally, and now knowing him and getting the coaching directly. It was that whole concept of the person you are interacting with. And I said this before, is somebody's precious child. And that is really, really impactful for me too, having a child. I have one daughter, and I remember thinking, would I ever want her to have me for a boss? And I would absolutely want her to have me for a boss now, but I'm not so sure I would maybe have wanted her to always have me as a boss. And that was where now it's not hokey, soft stuff. This is real. And I think back and I'm like, Laurie, think of your own performance. I would have gone to the ends of the earth for somebody who appreciated what I did. If they showed any level of appreciation, whether it was a card or even just a thank you or, oh my God, just acknowledge me, that would be helpful. But I think we get so tied up. I have heard leaders say they get a paycheck, that's how I thank them. And I'm just like, was that ever me? I hope not. But I think that's where Bob's message really resonates, is that caring. And then Steve Jones with the just love them. We could all lose together at the end of this game, but I'm still going to love you.
We think about business strategies such as customer centricity and voice of the customer and all those things that we're all pretty readily open to. And so if we were to summarize all that, maybe it's an overused term, but customer service. We're ultimately talking about serving customers. But now you're talking as a leader, not about customer service, but about employee service. And so here are the people that I'm leading, and I want to have a similar take care of them mentality with the people that I'm leading, as we would so easily say, we need to take care of our customers. And yet, I think with any individual employee that you're leading, I think it's fair to say you spend a lot more time with the people that you're leading at work than any customer that comes in the door once in a while. So how many more opportunities are there to have an employee service mentality, to have an employee care mentality as a leader. It's just making that leap to begin to see the people that we're leading as people. And it sounds like that idea of precious son or daughter really helped you get over the hump to see the people you were leading in that way. Is that a fair thing to say?
That is a very fair thing to say. That was truly the bridge of it. It was also role modeling. And I actually was in the training and development field for a long time and taught customer service. And that was before my credit union times. But if the employee doesn't feel good or cared about, how on earth could we expect them to project that on anybody else? I have to go back, and again, I'll just personalize it. I think part of the reason that I wasn't demonstrating high degrees of caring and so forth was that I was miserable. So until I was no longer miserable, I couldn't project pleasure and joy and caring on others as freely. Now I could do it, but it was really in controlled environments. And, you've mentioned a couple of times the fact that I'm sharing this openly. I'm being very vulnerable, and it's a little scary. I'm not going to pretend it's not. But I also think that the leadership journey, I wish my leadership journey hadn't turned 7 years ago, but maybe it had turned 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because I can't imagine the positive impact that I could have had on people, not just businesses, not just numbers, not just achievements, not just pocketbooks or whatever it might have been. It could have been on people's lives. And I hope there are people's lives out there that I touched positively. I absolutely pray that that's the case. But I know more than anything going forward, I don't ever have to wonder if that's the case. I know that now.
I want to talk about results just a little bit, because you've noted that previous to your work with Bob, that you got results. And I think we all understand we all have to perform in order to continue to be employed, in order to continue to have opportunities to grow and expand. But when you start caring about people, what happens to the performance?
I'm still very watchful of that. It's kind of like if all of a sudden everybody tells you can eat bacon, and it's just like, oh, you can eat as much bacon as you want. The scale's not going to go up. I'm the kind of person who, I don't know, I've been taught you don't eat bacon. And so I'm going to get on that scale. And the minute that scale starts to gain weight, I'm not eating bacon anymore. That's kind of like this change in my approach to leadership, because there's a huge part. If you remember, I was talking about the assessments. All of those assessments say my natural tendency is commander, captain, dominance. So I actually have to remind myself all the time the value of the caring approach and the kindness approach and leading with love and laughter over the results. But I'm watching the results. I'm still stepping on the scale every day, if you get what I mean. And it was interesting because one of the things that I just had an opportunity to work with one of our culture team members, she was asking me about the numbers and why the scorecard is important. And I said, you know what? We're surrounded by numbers. You get out of bed to an alarm clock. You then get in the car. It's all about the speed limit. How long does it take you to get to work? What time do you need to get to work? All these numbers everywhere. And of course, cash is king, or well, maybe not anymore. But we're surrounded by numbers. So we need to measure, but we don't have to have that in the forefront. We have to use it as a guide, use it to let us know if we're getting off track. If I'm showing a lot of caring and love or appreciation for folks and they start to take advantage of it, that could be a danger.
How much of that have you seen when you extend care to people try to take advantage of it?
I have not seen it. The only degree for which I have seen it is when there's not an explanation for some level of, I don't know if it's a handout or, sometimes appreciation can be insincere. You can't be disingenuous. Like I'm gonna tell you something. I am terrible with names, and I am worse with like kids' names, or I might remember their dog's name, but because I absolutely love dogs. I love kids too. That came off really bad, but it is it is highly likely I will not remember the person's name. But I want them to remember the experience. We talk about employee experience. I want them to have a really good experience. And just because we're given things out, I saw last year in COVID, we saw a lot of organizations just across the board gave amazing increases. And then those same companies, you started to hear bitterness afterward going, well, they're not even showing us appreciation for doing it. It's just like, you gave them a bunch of increases because you were afraid they were going to leave you, go to another company. And maybe that was true, but did they feel valued? Did they feel like the assets they are? Did they feel like they can make a difference every single day? Did they feel like that you were giving them a place to come to work that they wanted?
Oh, man, Laurie, that's so good, because when the reality behind it isn't there or doesn't come through, either way, here's millions of dollars of investment that lasts about as long as a lollipop. And of course, on the other side, we can get indignant about that. Don't they have an appreciation for what we're doing for them? But if we're not living it day in and day out, that they matter and that we want to make investments in them, I have a hunch. I don't have a way to prove this, by the way. I have a hunch that I could deeply care about somebody and give them $10 and have it be more significant for that person than if I didn't care and I gave them $100, because they can feel the difference in that.
And I think that leads to another element of something that I haven't always been good at, and just work really hard every day, because it does take work every single day, is listening. And really listen for the rumble, listen for the discontent, listen for the pleasure, listen for the joy, listen for the laughter, but listen. And, it's easy to get caught up in the work and you stop listening, or you stop hearing. I don't know which it is, because sometimes we just don't want to hear it, so we don't necessarily listen as leaders, because it is hard. I think the hard part is, even as I feel like I've made this shift personally and I feel so much better as a leader and work hard to do that, I still get disappointed that some people are suspect yet, or some people read into something I did or didn't do as something that it's not. That's hard. I remember I've been on my new job here. It'll be a year in November. And I remember someone had said, well, we're going through a lot of change. And I remember thinking selfishly, and then of course I had to go home and keep this to myself and digest it. But oh my God, can you imagine how much change I have gone through? And, you still work for the same company. You still have the same boss, direct and whatever. I have 450 people counting on me to have a good work experience, and it's not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, but as fast as I can own up to any mistakes and right the ship together, because it's not any single thing that'll take us down. What do they always say? It's not the water outside the ship that sinks it. It's the water inside.
Wow. Yeah. Your career path is extremely unique. I have never one time heard of anybody making the move from the HR executive seat to the CEO. And so I want people to hear a little bit about this from your perspective, because you did something that I've not known anybody else to do. How did that unfold for you to move from a seat? And I'm just going to say this is probably going to piss some people off. I don't mean it to. I'm not speaking to what I believe. I'm speaking to what I've seen. And what I have seen is that on average, in the executive suites that I've been in over the last 20 years, the HR leader is usually the least respected person in the executive suite, which makes the leap that you made really hard to do. So talk to us a little bit about how you went from an HR executive into the CEO seat.
I would say it started back at Associated Bank. I learned very early on that HR is not respected at the executive table. And because I obviously worked in HR for over 25 years of my career, sometimes it's our own darn fault too. The biggest thing that I started to learn early on at Associated, because I worked for, and I just have to name them because Bob Gallagher, who I cherish my learnings from him to this day. Pat O'Keefe, who passed away a couple of years ago, just an amazing, amazing mentor for me. Cliff Crockford, Harry Conlon, all those guys were instrumental in the early parts of my career. And the words business acumen always came to the forefront. And they said, all you HR types, which loved that, just loved that. You don't have any business acumen. You don't know how to manage a business. So what originally would have made you think I would go, well, then I'm getting out of HR, which was interesting because some of those same individuals I mentioned tried to get me out of the HR, to get me out. So sales administration, I worked for AMS, which is now United Healthcare, for a while. And in my 5th year there, they were trying to get me to take on sales administration, sales training, sales for across the country when they were doing some of their mergers and acquisitions. And I'm like, oh my gosh, absolutely not. However, I thought I'd love to feel what it's like to be on the revenue side of the house versus the expense, because HR is all expense. And that's part of the reason I think that it's like, you know what, you're the big expense. If you could get labor expense under control and benefits and all of that,
Right.
we'd be in a better place, because us revenue generators who are important people. So it was I think, first of all, my level of awareness of that situation or that perception was a challenge. And I remember vividly in an interview with a CEO for a job that I did get, and he asked me about why I was so competitive and why this and why that. And I could tell he had about as much respect for HR as a gnat. But that was okay. I was used to that. And I told him flat out, I said, I want to be one of the first HR and organizational development professionals to be in a CEO chair. And I actually even surprised myself. And I think I really only said it to him because I was irritated about a question he had and of course I had to make it constructive. And what I realized when I went home that day is I'm going to live true to that. I'm going to see that's a possibility. But I realized that was a pretty big dream. And that was 17 years ago. And I just kept trying to figure out, what do I need to know to be in that role? And there have been pivotal learnings along the way. And I've made it pretty clear to the leadership that I was interacting with and that I aspired for that. And I was willing to do and learn and take on whatever challenge along the way. And I've had leaders who stayed true to their commitment to helping me do that. And it was painful, some of it, because that I took on things that I had no idea how to to oversee. But I always told myself I never ever knew how to do anything before I started to do it.
That's so simple, but it's so important.
Exactly. I just remind myself of that all the time. So even, I will tell you, it was someone who had confidence in me with the only very little knowledge of me that said, Laurie, you need to go for that Capital Credit Union president and CEO position. And it was his encouragement, essentially an acquaintance who happened to know some of my background, and said, you need to go for it. And so I did. And it was just all the things that I had learned along the way. But I think more importantly, all of the things I've learned in the last 7 years about leadership and what kind of leader I want to be for a credit union. When you have a credit union, that we're all about people helping people. We're all about serving the underserved. We are all human beings. And if we can just look past our differences sometimes and see the value that each of us can bring to the table. And I have friends who will say, oh, you're a hypocrite. You can't profess to be this if you do this. We're all human beings. And the day I stop thinking that they're a human being first is the day my level of influence needs to be done, because I don't want to influence others to be anything but kind and caring and loving. And even for those who we have to make hard decisions. I make hard decisions every day. If someone's failing at their job, go back to R squared. If they are all about relationships, but they don't do their work, at some point we have to make tough decisions. But if that's the case, how can we do that with dignity and honor and hope and provide them other channels?
I believe strongly that if people around you are not constructively hearing improvement feedback from you, the person you're actually serving is yourself, because you don't want to be in a difficult conversation. And you say, no, it's about, no, I'll be really harsh here. You're being a little bit of a coward is what you're being. And maybe you don't know the right words to use, and maybe you need to figure that out. But ultimately, in the end, when we spare people the truth about their performance and what they're doing, and especially if we do it in the name of care. I mean, good grief. How could we possibly talk ourselves into that garbage? Now, we've got to show up with the care as well, right? I want people to be able to hear it in a way. I mean, I got to be for the person, I guess is what I'm saying. And if I'm really for them, I'm going to deliver a message that's hard to hear in a way that it can be heard, because I actually care about the person.
It's kind of like if I have to give constructive feedback to someone or tough messaging, I want them to know that I'm doing it from the heart, that, there's a business element to everything we do in business. Yes, but this is a people business. Everything we're doing right now, just like you're doing. The fact that you say that I might be able to help someone else or influence someone else and have them land in a better place, that's why I'm here.
That just shows where you're at, Laurie. I have a short question and then a medium question to wrap up here. Here's the short question, and I will fully admit ahead of time, it may be a completely unfair question. But you should know about me that I routinely ask people unfair questions. It is. I am more than happy to ask somebody something that's completely unfair if it helps us think through something. So here's the unfair question. If you were to go back 7 years, here you are now having made this move into a president CEO role, as you had said 17 years ago. If you were to have continued to lead as you did prior to the age of 50, prior to coming under Bob's teaching and influence, do you think that you would have gotten the opportunity to sit in a CEO role?
I think that's a fair question, and I think it's actually kind of easy for me to answer. I think the answer would be no. I would have never gotten here because I would have never pursued it for the right reasons. I think one of the interesting things Bob did for me, because I was so frustrated and so irritated, and I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I sacrificing all of this? I'm going to throw this dream out, and I'm going back to law school. And I told him that was what I was going to do. Because I'm like, you know what? Attorneys don't have to deal with any of this garbage, right? They don't have to deal with people. They get to serve up the law and however they interpret it for whoever they're defending or for whatever they're defending. I'm just going to get the law on my side. And he saw something in me and he said, you know what? I'm going to treat you like my daughter right now. And I'm going to tell you, absolutely not. You will not go back to law school. And I remember thinking, how can you tell me that? But he was so adamant. He's like, no. And then he went on to kind of talk about try this, this, this. And if you really still feel like you want to do that, then let's have that discussion again. But no. You need to just give this a shot. So I think I'd be an attorney right now.
Okay. All right. That's really interesting that the answer is so clear to you, that if you hadn't made a shift, you wouldn't be sitting in the leadership seat you are today, which leads us into a final question. We spent a lot of time talking about your transformation and where you were and where you are now. But I want to finish up by talking about the part that we haven't talked about yet as you look forward. What gets you excited about having both the position and the perspective that you now have as you look forward to the rest of your career?
First of all, I will use the word blessed. I've been blessed with this opportunity. And with that blessing, not only am I very grateful, but I also have a lot of responsibility to now do the work of, how do we go out and do good? How can I take this, whether it be next 9 or 10 years of my career and say, this is an opportunity to influence the world to be a better place. And maybe it's only my small part of the world. But if individuals can feel better about themselves, about what they're contributing, about their future, it's like I want people to love their jobs. I think some people, they trudge out of bed, they go to work, they have to earn a living. We call it work, we don't call it play for a reason or whatever. I want people to love what they're doing. I want them to enjoy their coworkers, who they see more than anybody else in their families. I want to be able to build people up so that they can achieve their dreams and believe that they actually can have a dream. I think some people are so caught up into the day-to-day challenges of life that they can't even dare to dream. And that's what I want to be able to do. I want people to feel like they're cared about, that they have potential. And even if they're on the wrong path now, they can get on the right path. Every day they wake up is a new day. My motto, can I be better than I was yesterday? And if I can be better every day from now until the end of my journey of influence, that's my goal. And I'll get tired along the way. And when I get tired, I'll look for those who inspire me, whether that be my family, my friends, my coworkers, all the employees here, my dog, you said now I have access to you for life. So, hey, you're stuck with me. But yeah, so it's better every day. And I want to help other people make their lives better every day too.
I know it's so simple, but I mean, when you talk about people feeling seen, valued, cared about, championed, which scenario do we think people do their best work in? I mean, it's like, is it when they're experiencing that or when they're unseen, not valued? It just seems like common sense that if we help people see those things, that not only will it be more fulfilling, but that it's also going to produce a better result.
Just one last thing on that, Tim. It's like intuitive. I mean, care about them. Of course, we should care about them. Hello, show appreciation. Why on earth is that even? How does Bob's making millions off of that? That's crazy. That's like common sense. Like, how is that possible? But the reality is, common sense and common practice, we know are not the same thing. And we also know that work moves fast. Everything is fast. Technology is fast. Competition is fast. So you have all these competing things for our attention, and things can derail us from that focus. And we'll get cynical or pessimistic. And this is probably the most important element of the caring concept. This isn't kumbaya. That's not for me. This isn't about, getting together and singing. The reality is we have to stay the course and stay focused. and not forget that there are people around us watching, listening, and learning every single day. They're being impacted by us every single day. The fact that I'm in my office for a number of hours and I don't walk the halls or I don't say something to folks, they feel that. They start to go, why is she in there? What is she doing? What? Now, of course, I have a note on my door today, but they're going to want to know why. And I think that's the key, is if we can communicate the why, show that we're paying attention. If we can't be there ourselves, we've got all kinds of folks who will be a part of the process of togetherness. But connectedness is key. It's not just caring for caring's sake. It's connectedness, it's togetherness, it's together we're stronger, together we're better, for sure.
What a treat. What a blessing that Laurie gave us by sharing her story with us. I just can't say thank you to her enough for her authenticity and her vulnerability, her transparency. And in doing that, she invited all of us on the journey with her. And one of the things I'm so appreciative of with Laurie about this episode is that I'm confident that there are going to be many people who hear Laurie describing her perspective on work and the people she's leading previous to her encounter and her development with Bob Chapman, who are going to relate to that, who are going to see themselves in those words, some in part and some maybe on the whole. Like you might say, that sounds exactly like me. And so I'm so thankful for her vulnerability to give anybody who connected with that a chance to go on this journey with her. And a couple of things here to point out is when you think about what you heard from Laurie, the biggest thing you heard in her growth and development was a change in her perspective about the people that she was leading. It wasn't change in technique. It wasn't change in strategy. It was a change in how she perceived and understood the people that she was leading. She obviously chose a more human way to see them after she began to work with Bob. And so I point that out to say, when we are working on ourselves or when we are growing and developing the leaders that we are leading, are we having conversations about perspective, about worldview, about how you see and understand others? One of the things that Bob did is his conversations with Laurie were world-class because he didn't leave it at the issue of action. He went much deeper than that and challenged her in how she saw and thought about the people that she was leading. So let's take a cue from Bob's example with Laurie, having heard about it from Laurie's perspective, to say we need to be having conversations about how we see and understand the people that we're leading. We can't just leave it at evaluating the actions of the leader. It's not enough. It doesn't get to the heart of the issue. The second thing that I want to say is, did you notice the timeline of all of this? We're talking with Laurie about her career and her contribution as a leader and what's possible that she sees now, what's different about what she sees now than before. And yet she didn't truly begin her current move in her perspective until she hit the age of 50. Many times on the podcast, we talk about the fact that leaders can grow and develop at the core of who they are past the age of 30. This idea that we're fully baked early in life and can't do anything to change that later on. Laurie's story displays how obviously wrong that idea is. And it's so important for us to, in order to be continuous learners and to grow to reach our full potential as leaders, that we know that we can grow and develop in meaningful ways no matter where we are in our careers. So the question I want to leave you with today is based on the incredible example that Laurie just gave us. And it applies to you no matter where you are on your leadership journey, but it especially applies to you if you're starting to head towards that back half of your leadership journey. So here's the question. Are you open to growing and developing in who you are as a leader at the very core of who you are? I'm Tim Spiker, reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share us with your colleagues and friends. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.